Luther concerning rebaptism, taken from the British Reformed Journal, an essay by Brian Harris. Luther asks, what do you gain even if you do succeed in establishing that children are without faith when they are baptized? It would make no difference to me, says Luther. Why do you say rebaptism is necessary when faith is supposedly present at a later time? What is the problem with the first baptism? You say it is not a proper baptism. What does it matter if it is still a baptism? It was a correct baptism in itself, regardless of whether it was received rightly. The words were spoken, and everything that pertains to baptism was done as fully as when faith is present. If a thing is in itself correct, you do not have to repeat it, even though it was not correctly received. You correct what was wrong, and do not have to do the entire thing over. Abuse does not change the nature of a substance. Indeed, it proves the substance. There can be no abuse unless the substance exists. When 10 years after baptism faith appears, what then is the need of a second baptism if baptism was correctly administered in all respects? For example, in the triune formula, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. If baptism was correctly administered in all respects, for now a person believes, as baptism requires. Faith doesn't exist for the sake of baptism, but baptism exists for the sake of faith. When faith comes, baptism is complete. A second baptism is not necessary. Luther draws a parallel with a woman who reluctantly marries a man but completely lacks affection for him. After 2 years, the woman grows to love her husband. Does this then demand a second engagement and a second marriage, as if the first did not make her his wife? The foolishness of this is clearly seen by all. So why then is not the foolishness of rebaptism also seen? If the validity of baptism depends upon me, on my faith, or on how I feel about my current state, then I will need to be baptized again and again and again. Luther asked the question, quote, what Christian will then ever be sufficiently baptized or consider that their baptism is complete? But baptism can be truly correct and sufficient, even if the Christian falls from faith or sins 1,000 times a year. It is enough for people to right themselves and become faithful without having to be rebaptized each time. Then why should not the first baptism be sufficient and proper if a person truly becomes a believing Christian? Since there is no difference in baptism whether lack of faith precedes or follows, baptism doesn't depend on faith. I'm going to read that again. Since there is no difference in baptism whether lack of faith precedes or follows, baptism doesn't depend on faith. But if faith is lacking, the Anabaptist, or Baptists, would have to believe that we must alter the nature of baptism to accord with the verse, quote, whoever believes, end quote. Luther is not content to leave it there, but drives home his point that the abuse of baptism does not invalidate it. Quote, quote, gold does not become straw because a thief steals and misuses it. Silver doesn't turn into paper if a usurer dishonestly obtains it. Since then the Anabaptists demonstrate only the abuse of baptism, they fly in the face of God, nature, and reason when they want to alter and make a new type of baptism, or make a new baptism, itself entreating the abuse. End quote. It is good that many will celebrate the Reformation on this anniversary. However, it is puzzling that many of these will reject the baptism of infants and insist on rebaptism for membership in their churches or to be able to commune with them. This cannot be done in the name of anybody. Indeed, it cannot be done in the name of the Reformation. Rebaptism has a different parentage. May not only the testimony of Luther, but also a united voice of all the reformers be heeded. As a fitting conclusion to this article, we quote Luther's own words, quote, we who know that baptism is a God-given thing, instituted and commanded by God, look not at its abuse by godless persons, but simply as God's ordinance. We find baptism in itself to be holy, blessed, glorious, and a truly heavenly thing to be held in honor with fear and trembling. just as it is reasonable and right to hold any other ordinance and command of God. It is not the fault of baptism that many people abuse it. It would be just as wrong to call the gospel an empty babbling because there are so many who abuse it. As far as I have been able to see and hear, the Anabaptists have no argument but high-sounding words of sacrilege and a false sense of piety. Therefore, everyone ought properly to shun and avoid them as messengers of none other than the devil, sent out into the world to blaspheme the word and ordinance of God, so that people might not believe it and be saved. For they are the birds that eat the seed sown by the wayside. Matthew chapter 13, verse 4. End quote. And with that, I will rebuttal that although I do agree with Luther on many things, I don't know if I agree with him as far as calling Anabaptists the birds that eat the seed sown by the wayside. Maybe time will tell, but at least he is right concerning other things, and especially that when it comes to the reasoning of Anabaptism. Called Concerning Baptism by Luther, from the article Luther Concerning Rebaptism by Brian Harris, published in the British Reformed Journal.